had this conversation with a well-known mental coach named Seth Pepper, who was a former #1 swimmer in the world, and now mental coach to a lot of pro golfers and hockey players and baseball players, et cetera. He has a notebook of all the stories he started to record about athletes who were sick and that were just so dominant when they were sick. And it's like, why is an athlete who's sick, puking, or injured even, why are they playing so well? It's because they cannot focus on the self-one, the negative self-talk. They're so in their body, they're so in survival mode, they're so instinctual that they're just playing, and it's almost reckless abandon in a way that is really useful in athletics. Like when I do documentary filmmaking stuff or interviews, I always tell the crew to record as soon as the person comes in, as they walk in the door, or if they're on camera remotely, because it's often that lead up that is actually most interesting. And then with some people, when you hit the record button, they go, they kind of go like, right. Oh, I can't, oh, right, it started, and I have to like play this person, which is all about the inner game in itself. But no, I would say, I'm in a unique position because I'm not a sports psychologist. I'm not a former professional, athlete. I did play college tennis at a pretty high level, so I'm familiar with the grind and the grit and the what it takes to get to a certain level at least. But I'm lucky because I get to see so many people and hear so many stories about the inner game and about sports psychology. I get to work with a lot of sports psychologists who, have forgotten more than I know. And just being in this world, I get to take in so much. And so I can at least provide feedback in terms of perspective, in terms of what I'm seeing, what works for athletes, what is that through line from athletes to musicians to business executives, at every level. There's a through line with the inner game, and it's about self-talk. And what I have dedicated my life, and I guess I'm realizing this right now as I talk about it, is I've dedicated my time and my life at this point to building a tool that helps with self-talk. And on our podcast, our first episode was Pete Carroll, who's a longtime inner game guy. Great story, but basically huge fan of Tim Gallwey and the inner game. He also grew up in the 70s in Northern California. There was something in the water at that time where guys like Tim Gallwey and Pete Carroll were really looking at coaching and going, it's got to be something different, especially Pete coming from the NFL and, the hard knocks and, male and, violent and like do this until your, lung drops out of your body kind of coaching and mentality. And so for someone to take sort of a softer inner spiritual approach to coaching at that time, especially, he was a pioneer. But anyway, he said something when I spoke to him. He said, after all these years, he said two things, and we can get into this later, but he said, after all these years, one is I still need to be coached up, meaning I, Pete, need to be coached after winning a Super Bowl, national championships, throughout my whole career, 40 years probably in professional sports. He's like, I still need to be coached up. I still need a coach. I still need to learn. It's that curiosity to learn and get better, which drives me. And if he says that, then okay, we all need a coaching resource in one way or another. And the second thing he said was, he said that, now I'm forgetting. He said coaching, and then he said, also after all my years, I've realized that it all comes down to self-talk. And there aren't really any blocking and tackling tools for self-talk. There are books, and you can go watch a talk or listen to something, but what is a real tool that you can use to help with the self-talk? Because it really comes down to that. I mean, yes, you've got to have, your physical life in order. You got to show up, right? You got to have you have to have the skills developed to actually play the game, whatever it is, and at whatever level. But it really comes down to the self-talk at the end of the day under pressure. And so back to what I've dedicated my life to is building a tool to help with that self-talk, a blocking and tackling tool for you to work with, that works with you, to help you understand pressure and to not step back from it, but to step into it. And there's a big distinction between like something like Headspace or Calm and other apps that are more lifestyle oriented, great, and a necessary part of the equation, I think, in some ways, but they're more down regulating. Whereas what I've been working on and the Inner Game sort of 2.0 is the Inner Game app, which is a coach in itself that is built on 50 plus years of Tim Gallwey, the author of the Inner Games work and life's work, what I would consider the source wisdom for all modern performance psychology and in many ways modern coaching, distilled into something that uses modern technology, uses AI, uses all the tools we have available to us today to help you step into pressure. And that is dealing with self-talk and what Tim Gallwey would call interference. So anyway, we can get into what that looks like, but that is, I say that because I get the benefit of just hearing so many stories about what works for athletes, what doesn't. And I was listening to your podcast about Michael Phelps, and we work with Bob Bowman. Actually, he's an advisor with us. He's been helping us shape the product and been an awesome advocate and champion of what we're doing. And it was so cool to hear you talk about Michael and Bob and yeah, we just want to bring a tool to more people that don't have a Bob Bowman in their life, right? Most of us don't, unfortunately, but we all need a coach. Pete Carroll said it best. We all got to be coached up. Now we just need the tools to sort of get there, not as a replacement to an actual coach, because nothing will ever replace a real coach, but we all need tools to deal with self-talk. So anything in that realm, I think would be good to talk about.
No, perfect. I was going to say, I'm not 100% sure about this. I don't think Bob Bowman has ever written his own book. And if I'm wrong, please correct me.
He has.
Okay, he has. Because I was going to say he should write his own book. And I am ashamed that I did not know that he wrote his own book, because that is going to be my next purchase off of Amazon.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, no, it's good. I also, Alex, one of my co-founders, he got the book and read it. I have not, admittedly. I need to. But we're actually doing a course with Bob Bowman. It's gonna be available inside the Inner Game app, and it's going to be loosely based on his book and the formula in his book, much of which was inspired by the Inner Game philosophy and material. But yeah, I'll make sure to send you a link and also let you know when that course is available, because I'm sure you'll get
absolutely. Because I read recently, I have it somewhere. So that episode that I did on Michael Phelps was based off of his book that he wrote, that the name No Limits, I think it's called. And just, I knew about Bob Bowman before just because I've been a huge Michael Phelps fan. But just reading Phelps's perspective and how he spoke about Bob Bowman, and then hearing the Bob Bowman quotes, Michael Phelps saying the greatest thing that Bob Bowman ever taught me was to eliminate the word can't from my vocabulary, because if you say you can't something, then why are you even trying? And it's just, I could listen to Bob speak. I could read his stuff for days on end. So that's why I'm saying my very next purchase from Amazon will be his book, because I'm dying to get into that.
He's a really cool guy, I could tell you from what I know of him so far.
Yeah, love it. You did bring up self-talk. Why is it important? Why should we care to hone in our self-talk?
It's about, well, it's interesting, in the Inner Game of Tennis and in subsequent books, Tim Gallwey introduced a formula, P equals P minus I. Performance equals potential minus interference. And the idea of that is that your potential in performance, whether you're a 14-year-old about to give a violin concert or recital, or you're a 26-year-old NFL quarterback and you're about to go play the NFC Championship game. If you remove this interference, right, P equals P minus I, if you remove the interference piece, then your potential in performance is sky's the limit, right? You will reach your potential in performance. And that interference is described as the self-talk, the negative self-talk specifically, right? The doubt, the judgment, the overthinking, the things that focus on the can'ts and the I need this in order for this to go right? All those voices that we all have, whether we're an athlete or not, we're all performers. It's just our stage is different, right? And so that formula, though, I think I've realized, and I don't want to change Tim's formula because he's the GOAT, but I started talking about it a little bit differently because I think the formula is a little bit misleading. And because you can't really remove the interference, right? Minus I suggests that you can just delete it entirely, but you can't remove self-talk. And so it's really about actually accepting that the self-talk is there and that it's only going to get louder as you get closer to performance, right? The closer you get to that golf tournament or that tennis tournament or whatever it is, those voices just get louder. And so to not that you said, I think you said hone in self-talk, which I actually think is the right way to describe it, because I think removing the negative self-talk is not realistic. It's about accepting that it's there and accepting the uncomfortable requirement of sort of stepping into that and accepting that it's not going to go away. And I know I always listen to podcasts. I'm like, oh, people always say like, oh, do the uncomfortable thing. Well, but guess what? People don't want to do uncomfortable things. That they don't want that. They spend most of their time avoiding uncomfortable things, and therefore it's like, give me the cheat code to like get away from the uncomfortable stuff. But you know this because you've studied this and talked to enough people, and probably know in your own experiences that that discomfort is not avoidable, but it's understandable. And that's really what it is the inner game, and all the work that we do is about understanding that self-talk, understanding that it exists, writing it out, right? Labeling it, making yourself aware of what those voices are, what they tend to say, because that awareness is curative. That's one of the most powerful things that Tim Gallwey ever said, or I ever heard him say, was awareness is curative. So just the fact, just the part of being aware. Don't take the pressure of like remove. Not that anyone's listening to me for advice, but like don't take the pressure of remove. You have to remove the negative self-talk, right? That has to be removed. That's way too much pressure and not realistic. So just be aware. It's the first step, and that's really what's important.
I was reminded Novak Djokovic has this amazing line, which, by the way, if you can't tell or perhaps didn't know, he is the greatest tennis player of all time, in my humble opinion. I'm sure people disagree with that, but a reporter, not important to this story, just wanted to enrage people with that comment. A reporter asked him, hey, how do you, like, what's your formula for mental toughness? Because everyone talks about your mental toughness. They say it's one of your most redeeming qualities. They say it's a big reason why you have reached the heights that you have. What is mental toughness to you? And he said, I think a lot of people get mental toughness wrong because they think, and this is, pairs beautifully with what you just said. He said, a lot of people think that mental toughness is like the absence of negative thoughts, that you are so tough that you do not think those things, or those thoughts do not come into your head. He's like, no, I'm a human being. Over the course of a tennis match, I may have hundreds, if not thousands, of negative thoughts creep into my mind. And we've seen it a lot of times with, him smashing a racket, or him yelling at the crowd, or right. Like that to me is like all those negative thoughts kind of coming out right in those instances. He was like, but my goal is to not dwell on them. It's to acknowledge that they are here, let them pass, and go right back to focusing on the task at hand. And so he always talks about how you're human. And that's why with a lot of podcasts, and listen, I am probably guilty of this, so I'm probably gonna sound like a hypocrite to a lot of people. I think with a lot of podcasts and a lot of advice, it's excellent theoretically, right? Like, yes,
Yes.
theoretically, if you could have no negative thoughts, that would be amazing,
Right.
in a sense. But
Right.
but theory and physical reality do not agree. And
Right.
so
It's like
the
saying I would
point,
work more if I didn't have to sleep.
right? It's like, yes, on an Excel sheet, if you assume that you could work 24 hours a day,
Right.
I'm sure
Right.
your bottom line, is going to look great, but that's
Yeah.
just not reality.
Yeah.
And so I always go back to that Djokovic quote because I'm like, that is true. And a lot of times now, I just got done talking to Zizo, who is a professional Saudi Arabian boxer. He's looking to become the first world champion boxer from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. I know this guy. Yeah. Yeah.
And he's amazing. I literally just got done recording with him, and I'm so excited for that pod to come out because I had so much fun. But he talked about that, and he spoke so eloquently about it, talking about how I have doubt, I have all these things. It's what make me human. But the purpose, or at least his purpose, and what he tries to do is to counteract all of those negative thoughts with something positive. So anytime he notices that he's thinking negatively, he's like, all right, let me counteract that with a positive thought, or let me counteract that with something positive. That was just a huge unlock for me. It may sound like common sense to maybe some people, but just the idea that you don't have to be perfect, like, and there is no way that you will be perfect in the sense of you talking about removing the interference. It's just not possible.
Yeah. That's so right. And the other thing I've noticed by doing this work is that we need to be reminded way more than we need to be taught something totally new. We already know this stuff intuitively. We whether we learned it from a coach early on, or a parent, or we just had this sort of natural intelligence, which we all do, by the way. And I'll tell you a little bit of Tim Gallwey's story about how the inner game of tennis was first written, if that's interesting.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people don't know the story. But yes, absolutely. Those little things were just, as I think humans evolve, we need more tools and tricks. I hate to use the word trick, but more resources to remind us of what we know intuitively. And that takes the pressure off too. It's like, oh, I don't have to like go learn something like totally, new, right? That's going to like take me forever to digest and apply. It's like this stuff is already, this inner wisdom is there. I'll send you a couple things that Tim has done, but I heard this story from Tim once about how most people think that Tim Gallwey, the author of The Inner Game of Tennis, most people think that he went to Harvard, which he did, was the captain of his tennis team, which he was, came home and plopped down at the kitchen table and wrote The Inner Game of Tennis and became like, the godfather of modern performance psychology and coaching, and, wealthy, successful man from then on out, right? And the truth is, when he came home from school, he was a really deeply, deeply depressed human being, a young man. And I talk about this in the Genius series. He was stricken with anxiety, and I won't go into the details, but he almost didn't make it, put it that way. And there's a story about how he was sort of wandering around one night aimlessly, looking for himself, I guess is the way to put it, after a series of near-death experiences, I would say. And he came across this young Indian guru named Prem Rawat, who at the time was, I think, 13 years old, who was touring the U.S. speaking. And Tim had this interaction with him, and he realized, he asked himself this question. He said, how does this 13-year-old or 12-year-old Indian boy who has comparatively no life experience compared to, someone that's older, for example, how can they have so much clarity in this and wisdom? How is that possible? And then he started to realize that the wisdom that he was seeking to heal himself was not outside. It wasn't at the feet of some wise man, right? It was all inside. It was in him already. And so that's why this inner work is so important, because I mean, we all, of course, we look for inspiration outside and for guidance and stuff, but the inner work, the natural intelligence that's there from when you were born and you're a kid, before your adult brain kicks in, reaccessing that as an athlete and a high performer, I mean, that's the name of the game. And that's just truth. So it's interesting to hear when you talk about those things, like the Saudi boxer you mentioned, have these things that he does, right? The negative thoughts counteracting with the positive thoughts. And that's really interesting. I want to learn more about that. But that's great, because that's what we do as people. It's what we do as kids. And learning to do that in a pressure situation, in a pressure environment, is a totally different story. It's like practice competition, right? They're just completely different playing fields, literally. They're different, different levels of the atmosphere. And that's why so much of what we focus on is how to actually access these tools under pressure and help you step into the pressure, because usually everything goes out of the window when you get freaked out and you're nervous, right? It's like, oh, I forget everything literally that I was taught and or thought about, and now I just have to really rely on instincts. And not to digress, but I had this conversation with a well-known mental coach named Seth Pepper, who was a former #1 swimmer in the world, and now mental coach to a lot of pro golfers and hockey players and baseball players, et cetera. And we were talking about how he said something along the lines of, he has a notebook of all the stories he started to record about athletes who were sick and that were just so dominant when they were sick. And it's like, why is an athlete who's sick, puking, or injured even, why are they playing so well? It's because they cannot focus on the the negative self-talk. They're so in their body, they're so in survival mode, they're so instinctual that they're just playing, and it's almost reckless abandon in a way that is really useful in athletics. And yeah, I don't know why I mentioned that, but it might be now that you know that, I'm sure you'll start to see like these stories of like sick athletes, and you'll start to go, oh yes, I can see the connection here.
Well, Michael Jordan comes to mind, definitely, the flu game. That is like the most prominent example, perhaps.
Definitely.
But even like, that's so interesting that you say that, because I was thinking about this the other day, and this is perfect. So I used to get, and this is going to sound, whatever, but I used to get really anxious before like presentations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a common fear for a lot of people, public speaking. And then one day I was just like so tired. Like I had not slept the night before. I was exhausted.
I know where this is going. Yes.
And I remember getting up there and literally thinking to myself, because I didn't feel the anxiety. I was just like so drained. I was like, all right, let me do this presentation. And like I wasn't anxious at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so weird. It's like my brain was at war with itself, because it was like it was trying to tell me like, hey, you should feel anxious. And it's interesting that we'll get to the self 1 and self 2 and define that for the audience. But it's like my brain telling me like, hey, you should feel anxious because you're giving a presentation, and in the past you have always felt anxious when giving presentations, but in this specific moment you're not anxious. So like, what's different? Have we just done enough to to not be anxious anymore? And I was thinking about that the other day, and I was like, maybe I was just like too tired to be anxious. But then I also thought, I was like, that's kind of dumb. Like, I don't know if that's true. But now that I'm hearing you talk about sick athletes and how their body was, fighting for survival, for lack of a better phrase, it took their mind off of what was at stake and the pressure that you had mentioned. And maybe that was the same when I was giving my presentation. My body was just so drained. It was fighting, to find every last ounce of energy to get me up there and to, make me do the presentation, that I just didn't have any more energy to be anxious.
I think that's right. I think what happens is we just focus so much on the how we're feeling, It really, not, now that I say it, it's like, that feels right. It's like we want to focus on our feelings, not necessarily our feelings, but what we feel. And so if we're so focused on the feel, then there's less opportunity for the self-one, the self-talk to get in the way. And so you're so tired that, yeah, you're just fighting for survival up there, and you can just be raw and honest. I always think about actors, and I did some stage acting myself, so I have some ability to relate to this. By the way, stage acting and athletics are like very similar. The way that you train, and it's extremely physical, and just like a lot of people think that, oh, yes, there's talent, and somebody's like, oh, naturally good on stage, or naturally, has a presence or whatever. But a lot of that is learned, a lot of it is discipline, and doing things over and over and over again, just like you would hit a forehand or a golf ball, or a backstroke. It's just there's nothing magical about it. It's nothing like, oh, I've just been ordained with this. I mean, some people have a knack for something more than others, but it's a learned thing, which is why theater and sports, theater actors in sports, especially, and athletes, are so similar. Yeah, it forces you to get into your body in a way that would normally take you perhaps longer to do, because you're so in your head, and you're so conscious, and you're so nervous and amped up, right? So, anyway, it'll come back to me.
Tell me more about self one versus self two.
Yes. So the Inner Game of Tennis, written in 1974, Tim Gallwey, the author, introduced this concept of self one and self two. Now, the Inner Game of Tennis drew a lot of inspiration from Eastern philosophy, and a lot of this stuff is not new. It's been around for centuries, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's just the Inner Game of Tennis translated something very profound for the world at the time, for the Western world, really, at the right time, and did it through sports, which really resonated with people. So I know I'm giving a little history on the Inner Game, but that's where self one and self two was introduced. This self one is, at its very basic, is the judgmental self, the self that doesn't stop talking, the narrator, the doubter, the one that doubts, the one that is micromanaging, really. And self two is the natural intuitive self. It is a self that learns by seeing and not so much by hearing. It's the self that taught yourself how to walk. I mean, you had assistance from your parents, but you didn't get verbal instruction on how to walk. It wasn't like, oh, put your left foot first and then transfer your weight to your right and then step that one. It's like, no, you learn because you're in that environment, and you can emulate. And that is what self two is really about. And so everything when we talk about the Inner Game is self one, self two. And it's not self one versus self two, because they have to live in harmony, but it's a lot of people talk about self one and self two in different ways, and they call them different things. And I interviewed somebody on our podcast the other day, a best-selling author named Jen Pasteloff, who wrote a book called On Being Human, and she calls it the inner asshole. And I said, okay, the inner asshole is definitely self one. So yeah, it's that's the breakdown, and it's a really great framework for understanding ourselves and the two different selves that show up in performance.
So then is the goal to quiet self one, or what should the relationship be between self one and self two?
Yeah, it comes back to that awareness of self one, awareness of what that self one is really your interference, basically. And so how do you not necessarily remove the interference, because that's not realistic, but how do you understand that it's there, become aware of it, accept that it's not going away? That's really what it is. It's not to quiet it necessarily. It's just to really be aware of it, and understand its relationship to to you in performance. So it's nothing to be deleted. It's nothing to be, to feel bad if it doesn't go away. It's just something to be aware of, really.
What would Tim Gallwey say about motivation and what we should be motivated by?
Mm. I think Tim would say be motivated by enjoyment as much as possible. And he opens the Genius series that we did, I think, in a really beautiful way. He said that the inner game is about excellence, your version of excellence, not someone else's articulation of excellence for you, but for you. And if you want to get better, you can. You're a human being. Enjoy yourself. That's really the motivation, is the enjoyment. Everybody will say, don't get motivated by the results. That doesn't work, right? And I think I personally think that's true. I think it's enjoyment in the process. And does it light you up? Does it give you that fire to do it in the process, regardless of whether you win or lose? And I can relate this in my own little way to, as a tennis player. Even last year, I played a tennis match, and I felt like some of my best tennis, and I was in the zone, so to speak, and I was not overthinking. I was in good relationship with self-one, and I was letting it go. And I remember thinking, I don't care whether we win or lose, because that's not what I'm going to remember from this. I'm going to remember this feeling that I have right now. That's what I'm going to remember. And I'm going to store for when I come back and I need that feeling again to access. So, yeah, I can't speak for Tim totally, but I think, knowing him the way I do, I think he would say that enjoyment is the most important thing to be motivated by, because we also play and perform our best when we are having fun. I know that sounds really simple and cliche, but it's true.
John Wooden, who I just got done doing a podcast episode on, from his book, which I was familiar with John Wooden, but I wasn't familiar really with his mantras and his lessons and quotes and stories. He has this one quote where he says, "I do not judge success based on championships. Rather, I judge it on how close we came to realizing our potential." And he talks about this over and over and over again in his book. He nails in this concept of, like, I do not care if we win a championship or not. He talks about how there was one season where I think the UCLA Bruins went barely over 500, and everyone at the beginning of the season were saying, all the critics were saying, hey, this team is going to suck. They may win 5 games. They're going to be one of the worst teams in the entire country. And they went barely over 500. And he said, that is one of my most memorable seasons that I've had, just because, like, we, in my opinion, achieved our potential. Like, that is the most that we were going to achieve that year. And that's all that I care about. So I always think about John Wooden and his advice and him talking about the process. It's funny, like, you hear all these people who have achieved great things within the world of sports, and it just happens that's kind of my world, that's my niche, but certainly outside of it as well. You hear about all these people who have achieved great things, and they all say pretty similar stuff, right? To your point earlier about sometimes we need to be reminded, not taught, is like a lot of people talk about the process. They talk about the fun is in the journey. The fun is not, whether you win. I had Luke McCown on my pod who said winning the Super Bowl was great, but what I remember was week 8 when we forced a fumble and or Drew Brees threw a crazy touchdown pass or whatever. That's where the fun was, because the winning part is it comes, it goes, and that's it. And then within a couple of days, you forget about it. Right. Or at least that feeling dissipates with time. And so, like, I hear all these things, and then at some point, like, I just have to be like, all right, well, if all these people are saying this thing and they have achieved amazing stuff, maybe I should, like, start, heeding some of that advice. Maybe I should start trying to apply that to my own life. And so I don't know. I don't necessarily have a question off the back of all those statements. It's just interesting to me that to your point earlier, a lot of this advice is repeated. And when you really boil it down, there are certain core principles and concepts that keep coming up over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, yeah, we're just recycling it, right?
Right.
Which isn't to diminish the work that you do or the work that I do. It's just, like I said before, as we evolve, we need to put this information into a modern context. And that's why interviewing athletes who talk about it, I mean, we need that repetition the same way that I need to hit a forehand. I needed to hit a forehand a million times growing up to be able to hit a forehand well, right? We need that repetition. It makes me think of, and I've talked about this before, and maybe I'm just repeating myself here, but again, it's another example of the things that just keep coming back. I think our relationship to discipline is something that is also constantly evolving as our relationship to work evolves, as our relationship to technology evolves, and it will evolve, I think, more rapidly over the coming years with the advent of AI and how that is it is going to disrupt people's lives for sure. Certain jobs that are not going to exist, or they're going to exist in different capacities, and the pendulum will always swing back. But that relationship um, to who we are and how we show up uh, is in the modern world is something that is always has to be worked on, and it requires discipline to do that. And people have negative connotation to the word discipline. I mean, I did for sure, until a great coach taught me to think about it differently. Discipline, I think, probably like you, like is like a principal or a teacher like slapped me on the wrist at school. I'm like, I got disciplined. But actually, if you look at the root of the word discipline, it comes from the word disciple. And the word disciple is really to be in service of something. And I heard it described to me once about being disciple of yourself, not to some, I mean, yes, you can be a disciple of God or some higher power, right? That's beside the point. But being a disciple of yourself in the process of relationship to what you're working on, whether it is in a business setting or it's as an artist or as an athlete, that is constantly evolving. So we have to be constantly having the conversation about how it evolves and what are the tools around working with that evolution. So yes, I mean, I nod when you say, should I heed this advice? It's like, yeah, I felt the same way. I'm like, I get to talk to all these great freaking athletes, Bob Bowman and Tim Gallwey. It's like, I should heed this advice too. And I do, I really do. And I feel like it has rubbed off on me. I remind myself to have fun in the process, because nothing else really matters. And that it becomes hard as you become an adult, right? It's like, as a kid, you're like, oh, have fun. I'm like, oh, that makes sense, because I don't have anything else to worry about, right? I don't have to pay the bills. I don't have a mortgage. I don't have like car payments and all the stuff that us adults have to worry about. As kids, most kids don't have to worry about that. Other kids have burdens, certainly, and some kids have more than others, but it's easier to say, go have fun as a kid and be like, okay, I can accept that. But when you say go have fun as an adult, it's like, well, wait a second, what about all my responsibilities? What about all the things that exist that keep me from having fun because they're administrative and I've got my favorite poet, David White, and philosopher and writer David Wright says, the kids have to have cornflakes in the morning. So how do you have this relationship to the thing that you love? And it really is what I coming back to the motivation question, and what this is all centered on, not to get too California woo-woo, is it is centered on love, because that love and that enjoyment, and let's use them synonymously, is where the good stuff comes from. And so being a disciple of that in you is the most important thing. And we need help in that process too, which is, this podcast helps people. They hear it. They may not have a coach. They may not have a resource. They may not have a parent or a partner that thinks this way, that is able to remind them on a consistent basis, this is important because this is the modern context for which people are receiving information and being inspired and learning what is important about motivation. So not that that's a pep talk for you to keep doing what you're doing, but it's like, that's equally to me. It's like, yes, this is important, and this is recycled, and this is stuff that we hear repeatedly for a reason, but hearing stories of application is how also us humans really understand it, right? We take information one way, but we hear stories, right? Again, thousands of years, starting with Gilgamesh, the ability to storytell and to understand, to deliver stories, to tell them, and then to receive them and understand their meaning and messages. Nothing more important than that, which is really what I like about your podcast and how you tell stories throughout. It's just so important for people.
Well, and I mean, amen to everything you said, but especially that last part about stories, because it's for someone who grew up watching athletes and being like, wow, I want to be like so and so one day. And listen, I don't want to give off the impression that everyone's perfect. There, no one is perfect, but there are certain aspects of athletes that are very admirable, and that I think people should absolutely try to implement some of that into their own lives. It's what I did. I mean, we had talked about it just a little bit before. Like, it's like when you hear some of this advice over and over again, it's like, all right, well, maybe I should start implementing some of that into my own life. But like, you're 100% right. It's the stories that stick, and it may be similar advice, but they're different stories. And so when you hear it through the lens of someone that you look up to or someone that you admire, that's, in my opinion, what actually makes it stick. If somebody were to come up to me on the street and be like, hey, the one way to deal with failure or the fear of failure is to just over prepare, I'd be like, okay, cool. But then when I hear Michael Jordan talk about how he was never scared about taking the last shot because he knew that he had done everything that he could to be as prepared as he possibly could have been to take that shot, then I'm like, oh, that sticks with me.
That makes sense. Now I get it. Yeah.
Right. That now I understand. When I hear,
because he doesn't leave with doubt.
Right. Exactly.
If he misses, it's not I didn't do enough.
Right. Precisely. Sage old business advice, right? The blue ocean strategy, create, don't compete with others, create your own sort of ocean that you are the sole member of. I hear that and I'm like, okay, cool. Maybe I'll try implementing that. But then I hear Kobe Bryant talk about how after his ankle injury in the 2000 finals against the Pacers, he looked to tap dancing to strengthen his ankles. He was like, wow, like these tap dancers, their ankles must be strong because they're doing all these crazy things.
Yeah.
Let me learn from them. And so he tapped into Kobe Bryant, in my opinion, was a blue ocean, just being the athlete that he was. But that to me is an example of someone looking into other areas that perhaps other people are not paying attention to. And then I tie that back to the blue ocean strategy. I'm like, oh, so Kobe Bryant looked at tap dancers and tried mimicking their workouts and their routines so that he could strengthen his own ankles. I wonder what areas I'm not paying attention to within the world of podcasting, maybe, or areas adjacent to podcasting that could make me maybe stand apart from other podcasters. So like, again, back to your stories, like I hear stories like that, and then I tie it back to concepts that I've heard that were maybe boring to me in the moment. And then the pistons start firing, and then it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Cause when we look too close in, I think we get trapped in like, oh, well, I can't do anything different from what I'm doing because this is just how I operate. This is just who I am. Yeah. Like you said, you hear stories and then you start to go, oh, okay. There are ways of thinking creatively, and there isn't just one way to do this. There are other ways, and I can be taught these other ways by looking at these people that have done it in the past and being inspired by them. I love that Kobe story about the tap dancers. Like, it's such a great example of how you can really, it's about creativity too, right? And I think that's what's scary about creativity is that people are afraid to be creative because it's utterly unique, it's unknown, and we just generally don't like to walk into a pitch dark room because it's like, well, what's in there? I don't know.
Right.
But it's that kind of creative thinking that gets Kobe to that place where he can heal faster or perform better in his own body because he walked into that dark room. And again, it comes back down to that discomfort, it comes down to the discomfort. But if you just kind of change the perspective of just slightly, you could say, oh, this is uncomfortable. Like Kobe he could have been two ways, walking into a tap dancing class. He could have been like, oh my God, here I am. I'm a freaking NBA star and I don't know what I'm doing. And this is stupid. And these people don't look like me or act like me, or, this is just, I'm not going to have fun doing this. This is, I should be doing something else. Right. Or he could be like, you know what? This is fun because I've never done this before. And because it's like, I might learn something. I might enjoy it. Right. It could be something I actually play with. And that's a big distinction, right? The former and the latter. It's night and day, but that's where that being comfortable with being uncomfortable thing comes really in handy, and you hear it over and over again.
Yeah. The other Kobe story that I think of is him studying great white sharks and then learning what he learned from studying great white sharks to be able to better defend Allen Iverson. So Ramona Shelburne wrote this article on Victor Wembanyama when Wemby did his retreat with the Buddhist monks. I think it was last off season. And within that article, there was a story how Kobe Bryant once went to, I think it was off the coast of Mexico. He went cage diving with great white sharks and he tracked their patterns, the way that they moved. And if Kobe was still alive, I would love to ask him, like, what specifically did you take away from that and then apply it to defense? But Ramona spoke about how he took what he learned from those great white sharks and then applied it to how he was defending Allen Iverson.
Wow.
Because he famously talked about how, defending Allen Iverson was difficult. I mean, obviously AI, one of the greatest to do it. And certainly if you want to talk about creativity and being different from everyone else, that was AI. What he was able to do at his size is remarkable. But like, again, another example of Kobe going into these, what may seem random to the rest of us, areas to seek answers. But to him, it felt very calculated. And maybe he thought that AI, like his specific movements, reminded him of great white sharks in a way, or I don't know, maybe the way that the sharks are, maybe the way that they're able to change directions so quickly and efficiently. Maybe he took something from that, but it's just another remarkable story. And then to just finish that, Steph Curry talks about how he pays attention to his pinky toe when he's shooting a basketball. And if his pinky toe is out of alignment, then everything else is compensating for that misalignment. And he says, if I'm missing a lot of shots, the first thing that I do is I look at, how are my toes aligned? How my pinky toe in the right place? For those who have played basketball, I used to play basketball in high school. Like, when's the last time, if ever, you thought about your pinky toe when you were shooting a basketball? Like, it never even crossed my mind, right? But hearing stories like that, and then, pair that with the sage old advice of, hey, being detail oriented is a good thing. Like it all comes down to the details. Like, if you get the details right, you will get the bigger picture thing right. It all adds up. And so again, that advice, okay, cool. And then I hear Steph Curry talk about how he cares about his pinky toe when he's shooting a basketball. And it's like, oh yeah, that guy's detail oriented on a level that I didn't think was possible.
Yeah, he's also so in tune with his body that
Right.
is not surprising. And Tim Gallwey talks about giving yourself on a job when you're playing tennis or doing whatever it is you're doing. In tennis, he'd say, listen to the the sound of the ball. Nothing else. Just focus on the sound of the ball coming off the racket, hitting the court, going off your opponent's racket. It's kind of like that being sick thing. Like you're focusing on something else. And therefore you're able to just let the body do what it knows how to do. And I don't know if that is exactly what Steph is doing with his toe, but it's interesting. Even just using that as a segue to this teaching of Tim Gallwey, which is about giving someone a job. It could be that she focuses on how his left pinky feels, or he's focusing on the sound of the crowd, or the ball dribbling on the basketball court. And that I've heard repeatedly from athletes as something that is, again, sounds really elementary and simple, but it's really powerful and it's subtle, but it's this idea of attention and awareness. Right? We said awareness is curative, and it's awareness of your negative self-talk is curative of that self-talk. It helps you accept and deal with it better. But also that where you direct your awareness can also be really useful in allowing your natural abilities to come out. And you're not so overly focused on the result of something that you're doing, but it's more something in the process.
I'm really curious to hear your take on this, because I'm assuming you're a big tennis fan. The Nadal documentary, there was a part in there, which, by the way, I've said this over and over again, one of the best sports documentaries I have seen. I liked Nadal as a player. I had massive amounts of respect for him, but after watching that documentary, my respect for him has gone to a completely different level. Just everything that he had to go through, and his mindset, dedication, all those amazing things. Mm-hmm. There are multiple instances within that documentary where, Tony Nadal, they speak about the training, regiment that Rafa goes through. And oftentimes it's Tony talking about just endure one more ball, just, hit one more ball. Mm-hmm. Famously would have very difficult practices. Rafa said how, make the practices harder than the games, so that when the game comes around or the match comes around, it's easy. Yeah. Tim Gallwey talks about over-teaching, and talks about how basically sometimes over-teaching is tied to the coach's ego, and how it could be where the coach wants some of the credit, some of the success for the player's breakthrough. How do you wrestle with that idea when it comes to some of the habits that Tony instilled on Nadal, and how difficult the practice was, and all those things, the over-teaching? I think we can pretty confidently say, Tony, perhaps maybe not over-teaching, maybe it was the right amount of teaching for Rafa, but I think in a broader sense, definitely a lot of hard work, a lot of overwork, which I think Rafa spoke to about as well.
Yeah.
How do you wrestle with Gallwey's teachings and then kind of the Rafa Nadal and Tony Nadal example?
It's a great topic. First off, I also really enjoyed the Rafa doc. I only saw the first episode of it. I actually got to watch it with the director, Zach, who's a really nice guy who said something interesting to me, which I think you'll appreciate. He actually said it to the crowd, so I'm not divulging anything, but he said that it was, so Zach, the director, is also a cameraman himself. So it's not like he's a director and he has a cameraman that he's with, and that they, went everywhere with Rafa in his home and tournaments and everything to make this. Zach was the cameraman himself, which is pretty common in documentary filmmaking, but not always the case, especially on a big budget thing. You're a director and you have somebody else that's going to shoot. But Zach was the camera person, and thank God for it, because in the van that players travel, to tournaments, around tournaments, right? It's his team. It's Rafa, and it's his whole sort of coaching staff that's there. And if Zach had a camera person, it would have displaced one person from Rafa's team. And that's like a family. And that would have been, I think that this came up because it was like, hey, how'd you get so intimate with Rafa? And that's what struck me so much about that documentary was how intimate he was with Rafa and with his team. And, there's always going to be difficult challenges around people feeling displaced, and all of a sudden we have a camera on us as a team, and certain people are going to feel weird about that. And I'm sure Rafa felt weird about that, at a certain point. But Rafa was very, very, he was very conscientious and very concerned about upsetting his team with this film, this series, being shot around him. And if Zach, the director, had a camera person also with him, someone else would have had to have gotten out of the van. Someone in Rafa's team would have gotten out of the van. It would have changed the whole dynamic of the whole thing. So the fact that he could get so intimate there, because it was just him and there was only one other spot on the bus, made that whole experience, I think. But as a viewer, I guess, that intimate experience as a viewer. But yes, absolutely. On over teaching as a whole, I think coaches, for sure, based on what I've seen and heard and even experienced myself, is that certain coaches just want to hear themselves fucking talk. And whether they want to have, maybe they do want to have some, credit in your success. They that's a shallow coach. I think it's I think a lot of, Tim talks about it as, well, if a coach doesn't talk to you about what you're doing wrong or how to do something different, then they have this insecurity about, well, am I worth my fee? Well, you don't pay me, your parent doesn't pay me to just sit here and say nothing. So I'm going to talk for this 60 minutes or an hour and a half or 2 hours, whatever you're paying me to be here. And that is absolutely the wrong approach and totally debunked by the inner game, because going back to that story about Tim when he was younger, after he had that encounter with Prem Rawat and he started realizing that the answers he was seeking were in him, he got a job at a tennis club. And first he was stringing rackets because he couldn't do a whole lot more. And then the story goes that the head tennis pro was caught embezzling money. So they fired the guy and they were like, all right, Tim, you're the new tennis pro. And so Tim had never really given lessons before, and he was coming off of this very traumatic and difficult time in his life. And he was just sort of seeing coaching in a totally different way. He was seeing how when he actually said less, the person he was teaching or coaching was doing better. And by showing them more and talking less, the more effective it was. And the inner game books are riddled with these stories about teaching and over teaching, but that's really what changed modern coaching, is this idea of, well, I don't need to verbalize everything. I don't need to focus on their external game so much. I just need to help them feel it, give their self one a job, and let them do this on their own. And there's a great story about Tim, who was called probably some time in the late 90s by a guy who was a professional tennis player. He was a little later in his career. He was a qualifier for the U.S. Open and struggling with his volleys. And he was like, God, I'm however old he was. I'm 25, I'm 26, 29, whatever it is. And I don't have that many U.S. Opens or chances to qualify at the U.S. Open in me. And I'm struggling with my volley so much. I just don't have the kind of world-class volley I think I need in order to break through and win a couple rounds of the qualifiers and make it into the first round of the U.S. Open. I mean, that would make my whole career if I could just do that. And so somebody called Tim, who was living in New York at the time, I think, and Tim went out there to the practice courts at the U.S. Open And the guy was telling him all this, and like, my volleys are just not good. And Tim said, let's imagine your volley is exactly the way you want it to be. Show me what that would look like. And the guy goes out there and hits like volleys. And Tim goes, there you go. And left. And the guy was like, oh my God, he did it. He had it. It was there. It was in him. He was just in his own way. And that's a perfect example of like, you don't need to overcoach. What, you just, it's the, and that visualization, that emulating, I mean, that's a whole other topic of visualization and stuff. But just pretend that just pretend you show me the volley. It's there. You have it. And I think the guy won a couple rounds. I'm not sure. I got to follow up on the story, but to me, that's sort of the crux of it all. That's really the crux of it. And back to the Nadal thing and Tony and stuff. It's a really good question. I think I have to think about that. I think there were some very unhealthy ways in which Rafa was coached and the way he trained. And I think certainly he had the personality for it, but it doesn't mean that he was overcoached. He may have been overworked, right? Which maybe or he worked more than others, which may be what he needed, or maybe it wasn't what he needed. It's not for me to determine, but it doesn't mean he was overcoached per se. But that story about Tim and that qualifying player really, to me, sums it up about coaching and overcoaching and what the coaching industry can learn from that. And I'm seeing a resurgence of people going to the inner game philosophies and methodologies for coaching. Less is more because the person you're teaching or coaching has it in them. It's just about bringing it out, not telling them what to do.
I think about Bob Bowman and Phelps, who we've mentioned a couple of times during this podcast, where Phelps talks about, because people always, I don't say people always, but he was asked during an interview, hey, Bob Bowman was known to be an asshole sometimes towards you and say certain things. And he said, no, that's exactly what I needed. In fact, like I couldn't have reached the heights that I did with a perhaps non-asshole coach. Like I needed someone who was hard. And he talks about, Phelps going through depression and anxiety post his swimming career. He talked about how the same way with therapy, like I needed a therapist who was more hard on me, who was a little bit more of an asshole. Cause it doesn't work with me if the therapist was easygoing or just asking me, layup questions.
Right.
And so I don't know. I think a lot of it is like what that specific athlete responds to. And ultimately, we hear about the stories of a Nadal or of a Phelps where that specific style worked for them, and clearly it worked for them because they reached incredible heights. And this is a little bit of the success fallacy, right? Where we don't hear about all the examples of a coach that was not a good fit for a player at all and actually led to the player's demise, because that happens as well. Where if you paired a Bob Bowman with another swimmer, that swimmer's career could have been destroyed. Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. Or you pair Tony Nadal with a Federer, and Federer maybe is never the player that he ended up being. So it's interesting. Like we hear the success stories, and then it's like I said, it's like the broader concept of success fallacy, where you hear about all the things that these successful people did, but then you also don't hear about people also doing all those things but failing and not reaching that same level of success. And so that's why it's also a little tough, especially like when I talk about athletes and the advice and their stories and stuff. It's like, yes, Kobe Bryant worked hard. Yes, Kobe Bryant was maniacal. Yes, he was detail-oriented, all of the things. But there are also other basketball players who also worked very hard. Maybe not to the level of Kobe, and maybe that little separation is what put Kobe over the top. But I always tell people, be a little careful with some of the advice, because like other players have also worked hard and done all the things and have not reached the heights of a Kobe Bryant. So it's it just brings me back. I think Michael Bloomberg actually had this quote where he was like, if you work hard, you are not guaranteed success. But if you do not work hard, I can guarantee you the result. And so it's just one of those things. I think hard work and doing all the stuff is the in my opinion, it's the price for admission. And
Mm-hmm.
then there are other factors outside of that, like luck, which is a big one that people often don't like to talk about, and circumstances and other stuff that need to align for you to reach the 10x, 100x, 1000x multiple of success.
Yeah. Yeah. In my observation, it's the choice that we make, or these athletes make, on a continual basis about whether to beat themselves up or to go for it again and give themselves the ability to move on. Like you talked about Djokovic, like I got thousands and thousands of negative thoughts, maybe even in a single match, but I don't dwell on them. And I think that is what really separates these guys and gals at the end of the day. It's their ability to not dwell and to move on quickly. And of course, over time, luck and everything, but it's to me, that's what it's about.
I got a couple more questions for you, Ryan.
Yes.
Talk to me about imagery, visualization, what Gallwey says about those things, and how you interpret that and why it's important, and what Gallwey's advice was for people who wanted to visualize or use imagery to their advantage.
Absolutely. Visualization is at the very core of the inner game. And even, I'm not sure exactly what Tim calls it, but pretending to be someone else. And Steve Kerr has a great story about this. So the inner game of tennis and the inner game became popular in the NBA starting in the 90s. Phil Jackson, famous Buddhist student of Buddhism, brought that energy and spirituality and approach to him with the Bulls. George Mumford being someone that he also brought in to focus on the inner game as a whole. Steve Kerr was a recipient of the book at that time period, and I think used it, but started to understand over time as he got a little older and later in his career exactly where it made the most impact. So Steve Kerr, later in his career playing with the San Antonio Spurs, was feeling very stuck in his practices. He wasn't having great practices, and he was just, I don't know if he'd gotten a lot of playing time that year. And I was always looking at someone like Jeff Hornacek as someone who was more dynamic on the court, more creative, more versatile, could hit shots from all over, from more places. Steve felt like he was more like pigeonholed with a 3-point, and the inner game taught him to actually go on a limb, and maybe he even talked to Tim Gallwey. I actually think that might be part of the story. He may have had been actually in touch with Tim Gallwey, and Tim Gallwey told him to pretend he was Jeff Hornacek in his next practice. And Steve famously did, and had the best practice of the year. And guys were coming up to him after, like, Steve, that was a freaking awesome practice. Like, where did that come from? And Steve took that into the Western Conference Finals, where he got put in late in the game and helped score like 18 points in like 2 minutes or something. It wasn't all him, but he scored like 3-pointers in like 2 minutes or 3 minutes left in that game. It's a famous game, Spurs against maybe it was the Suns. Anyway, Steve attributes that to pretending to be Jeff Hornacek. And I tie that to visualization because, and maybe it's a style of visualization, but the power of that, right? The power of that. I mean, I have a 4-year-old daughter who pretends to be Elsa or pretends to be Cinderella, and she comes out and she is Cinderella. You know, she really feels it. And we lose that as we become adults, but damn, how fucking effective is that? You know? And I'll say it again without the expletive. How effective is that we can actually pretend to be someone else and to that we love and that we have that connection with, we can actually embody that and then deliver in performance. That is fantastic. That is the most powerful thing you can do. And that's at the heart of the inner game, no question. No question.
That it's crazy because it ties back to a lot of what we've talked about in this podcast, which is sometimes being reminded of certain advice and how we often need reminders. Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up the example of your daughter, because where my mind immediately went was 6-year-old me, maybe I was 7, 8, I don't know, in my backyard playing basketball, pretending like I was Mike Bibby or Chris Webber. And there were 3 seconds left on the shot clock. And I'm a Kings fan, which was great in the early 2000s and has been terrible ever since. But those early 2000s were fun. But like trying to be like those guys. And I remember like I would try to shoot like Chris Webber did. He had a shot that was a little bit forward of his face and being like, oh man, like he would famously kind of bring the ball up super, super far forward. And then Mike Bibby. And what was funny is like when I played like Chris Webber, I would like, stand up straight and try to act bigger because he was a big guy. He was 6'10". He was a power forward. So I would get up nice and big and I'd have a power move or two. I'd be backing. And then when I'd be mimicking Mike Bibby, I would like play closer down to the ground or do some more crossover moves. And he had that shot where it was like right at the top of his forehead. But that like as kids, it's instinct, right? Like it's natural. Mm-hmm. Like that's, nobody told me, hey, if you want to become better at basketball, try mimicking these guys who you love, who you adore, and try to be like nobody told me that. I was just like, oh, this is cool. I love these guys. Like I want to be like Chris Webber. I want to be like Mike Bibby. I want to be like Peja. I want to be like, like I feel like my mind is I don't know. It's blown right now because I had forgotten about that until you had brought that. Sorry, and I've read the Inner Game of Tennis and I've gone through the stuff, but it's so powerful. And now when you think about it as adults, you're 100% right. Like it's almost like you lose that instinct in a way. And I don't know if that's maybe just you become more aware or, I don't know what the root cause of that is, but like even when it comes to podcast,
our identity, I think our identity gets more, we think it gets more solidified over time, right? Oh, well, I'm this and I'm known for this, or I'm, or this is who I believe I am. Right. And therefore I'm so entrenched in that,
right,
that I can't fathom being beyond that. And I don't know if it ties to that Kobe story about the tap dancing, but it's like, that subtle creative thinking. You didn't have to go buy a new racket or a new ball or a new hoop or new shoes or go get, go to 3 weeks of camp. Like, I mean, those things are all important, but they're only useful if you're able to actually employ some of these things at that time, right? Like it's a tool, and we, like you said, we forget it as adults, but being reminded that is available to us just as much as it was when we were kids, if not more, it's a powerful thing.
Well, then you go through the stories of some of these athletes, Kobe Bryant mimicking Michael Jordan. And there's those side-by-side videos where it's the exact same move, like down to a T. And you hear countless other stories of, even tennis players now growing up, mimicking either Federer's one-handed backhand, or you look at someone like, you look at Sinner and Alcaraz and the way that they slide on the court, and them talking about how watching Djokovic slide, especially on like a hard court, they're like, I want to be able to move like that. So now you see them doing kind of similar slides and unlocking their movement based off what they saw from Djokovic, and the elegance of Federer and Sinner talking about, I remember him saying how he really loved the way that Federer handled himself on the court and how calm he seemed and how he never seemed out of control and was never yelling at people or whatever. And he
And
was
you
like,
see that
I want that
you see that
same.
in Sinner today.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, you never see Sinner. I mean, I haven't seen him, with these outbursts or uncontrolled bouts of anger, and
Nope,
it's fascinating stuff.
It is fascinating. It's a beautiful thing, and like I said before, it's available to us, and one of the things that we've been working on with the Inner Game app is, so to see someone slide on a hard court, like you said, and emulate that, which you totally can do. But what if you could actually emulate what they're thinking and what they're telling themselves, which is why Djokovic talking about what he tells himself, and why, when athletes open up about their inner game, why it helps us is that it actually can be emulated and imitated as well. It's not just, hey, I'm going to go out and play like Djokovic and slide like Djokovic on a hard court, but I'm actually going to go out there and think like him. If I go out and think like him, that changes everything. Then it'll well, I think it goes in both directions. If you think like him, your body's gonna follow. If you play like him, then naturally you're gonna start thinking like him. And so, but making that connection between the physical and the mental, and helping us understand how these athletes actually think, is part of what we're doing with our app, and some of the courses we have coming out is really about, what are the thoughts, right, from these athletes, that we can practice them the same way.
What isn't there a point though where too much emulation is also bad and robs you of your own creativity and your own personality?
Yeah, I'm sure, but I wouldn't be worried about that, because you're never really going to be able to imitate Roger Federer. I mean,
Right.
Enough, right? And it's you under there. It's like why great actors who, they'll, Jim Carrey will say he emulated, try to imitate Buster Keaton in some ways, but he's not Buster Keaton. He's Jim Carrey. He has his own person, his own personality, his own way of being, his own presence, right? But to pull Buster Keaton in, very much explains Jim Carrey's physical sense of humor. And so I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's us underneath, but the more good things we can pull in from the things that inspire us, the better.
Yeah, I think that last sentence that you said is key, right? The more that we can pull in from others, but to me, what that means also is like picking and choosing, because I think your own personality is understanding what is useful to you. And so what may be useful to me could be completely different from what's useful to you. So you and I could both study Roger Federer, but come out with two completely different.
Exactly.
Right. And so that's where our personalities differ. And that's where kind of your own creativity and where you can start to build on some of the stuff that Federer did. By the way, I didn't know this, and I promise we'll end it here. Roger Federer used to struggle a lot with like self-talk and with anger issues early on in his career. And I didn't realize that until I read Christopher Clary's book, biography on Roger Federer, which is fantastic. It's so good. But I thought that was interesting. Like, here's a guy who was known for his stoicism on the court, but yet growing up was out of control in many ways.
Yeah, he was a really hot-headed teenager, and we have something on our Instagram. I have to go back and watch it. We have an interview from Roger that we pieced together, and I think he talks about how he had decided at some point whether that was servicing him well or not, and one day he was just like, I'm sure there's lots of factors, coaches and parents and growing up and experience and all that stuff, but I think it came down to him really deciding, saying, you know what, this is not useful to me. And once he decided that, boom, he went up, like way up. So yeah, it's it is it comes down to, I think, honesty within ourselves, not necessarily being honest, although that's important and, you know, we should be honest, but it's honesty with ourselves. It's like with Roger, if he's being honest with himself, is this serving me or is it not serving me? It's easier to freak out, and that's who I am, and that's how I, release that tension, and that's just like, it's hard for me to let that go. But if I'm honest with myself, I'm honest that I'm nervous, I'm honest that I have doubts, I'm honest that, I'm afraid I'm going to screw this up. I'm honest that I'm honest in all the feelings and emotions and thoughts that come along with performance at a high level. Again, whether you're on the biggest stage in the world or just the biggest stage in your world, that inner honesty is a skill. And the more we can be honest with ourselves about what exists and what is useful to us and what is not, is what I've observed it separates the good from the greats.
Yep. No, very well said, and an excellent way to end this podcast. Ryan, can't thank you enough for coming on, man. This was so great. Like I said, a little bit before we started recording, I'm a big fan of the inner game of tennis. It has personally helped me, and I know it's personally helped millions of other people. Real quick though, before we sign off, where can people find you? Where can they find the app? Where can they find the content? Yeah. Where can we find out more about the inner game?
Yeah. So, our Instagram, just at the inner game, is a great place to kind of come into the inner game world. We are launching a podcast that'll come out October 1 called The Inner Game, where we talk with coaches and high performers. It's about self-talk. It's about coaching, the value of coaching and coaching stories. And there's a link to the app there on Instagram, right on the profile. If you comment on any of our videos, you comment inner, we'll send you the app. You can also find the app on the App Store, just the inner game. And our website is theinnergame.app. And you can find that on our Instagram or just a quick Google search. So Android is available in 2 weeks. So we'll do a proper announcement on our Instagram about the app being publicly available on both Android and iOS. But we have athletes and coaches and musicians and business people. You talked about public speaking earlier. That's a big number. That's one of the 3 biggest reasons people have been downloading the app, and it's been in closed beta today. We have a very large wait list, but we let certain people in because we just want to get people's feedback and want to make sure we're building something that is in partnership with people and they're, telling us the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's been the building of the app has been an amazing process because I've been able to talk to athletes and coaches and work with coaches like Bob Bowman who've said, hey, this is how I work with athletes in terms of visualization. Bob is also a big visualization guy. And so to take all that in and then learn from people using it and going, hey, this is working, this is not working. But at the end of the day, the app is, the feedback we're getting is it's helping people trust themselves under pressure. I don't think we talked about that enough we talked a lot in some ways about that, but it really comes down to trusting yourself under pressure and self 1 and self 2 and the understanding of interferences and stepping into pressure. That's really what it comes down to. And so, the feedback has been very good and would implore people to give it a shot. There's a free trial. You download it, you put it in an event if you have one. Let's say you got a big golf tournament coming up with your buddies or a tennis tournament, or you're going to give a public talk, right? You're invited to give a public talk somewhere. And so you put the event in, and then the app will build you a custom mental training program that's hyper personalized to you and that event. And it'll work up to that event with you. And it shows up in a daily practice. There's a morning ritual and an evening reflection. And it learns you, and it's got great content in there that'll help you understand the concepts of the inner game that are, again, really specific to you and where you are in your performance journey. But it utilizes journaling, visualization, breath work, all the things we know work in sports psychology, many of which came from the inner game in the first place, the inner game books. And our job is just to put it in a format that's just fun to use and uses modern technology in a way that just makes it feel really personal. It is really personal. You still have to show up at the end of the day, like anything, right? The basketball is not, the free throws are not going to shoot themselves. You got to show up. But we make it our job is to make it really easy for you to show up and keep showing up so that you can do this work and have fun. I mean, it's a fun app. And so it's early days, but it's got, the feedback's been great. And we think it could be one of the most impactful products out there. So we're excited for you to try it. You, Nick, I want your feedback, and for your audience too.
As someone who, studies athletes and coaches and is within the sports world, and I can certainly testify to how valuable, when we talk about on this podcast, how valuable the advice is, how valuable the teachings are, and how important it is to just be reminded. And there's so much that occupies our brain on a day-to-day basis. Am I running late to this meeting? Am I going here? Am I going, is this bill paid? Is like your brain is constantly being fed, especially in today's day and age with social media and, distractions and all that. So, like I know for myself, again, as someone who is on social media way too much, but I consider it part of my job, having an app that is just a reminder, like, hey, gentle reminder, do this, do some breath work. Here's, here's what you should, or, hey, here's this teaching from so-and-so that could help in this specific instance. Just having that pop up, kind of snaps me out of my go, this needs to get done, and just reminds me to sit down and actually do it. And if nothing else, if the app does nothing else, but just reminds me, it's already 10 out of 10.
Right. No, it's so true. And it's so true. And it's great to hear that, because I think we as product people developing it, sometimes we do the harder things first when that is really good feedback. And I totally agree. And it's an opportunity to tell you a story about an athlete, about their inner game, right? This is a place where not only can you work with a coach that's powered by the best technology, but it's also, again, it understands you deeply and therefore can recommend content to you and stories to you, whether it's audio, video, or written, that will help you think creatively and step out of yourself a little bit in ways that we talked about, has been so helpful to some of the greats. So appreciate that feedback.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming on the pod and giving me an hour and 30 minutes of your time. So likewise, thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you for sharing your thoughts and your opinions. It was a true pleasure to get to know you, Ryan. All the best. And if I can help in any way possible with the app, you just let me know. I am more than willing to.
Thanks a lot, man. I really enjoyed this. Appreciate it.
All right. Till next time.
Okay. Bye. Bye next time.